Hi everybody, Mark Gaines here. What has prompted today's discussion with you regarding color is a piece that I've worked on recently here behind me. For some time now, I've been fascinated with this idea of trying to create a sense of light play using color and color relationships. When I work with students and even artists who are attempting to create light play in their paintings, whether it's abstract or figurative, oftentimes the problem is that they run very quickly to white, and they think that by adding white to a lot of colors, that's going to create that sense of light play. And that can work, but can also deaden a painting. There are many great examples of artists, all going back quite a bit, that have discovered and experimented with this idea of using color relationships, particularly because of in relationship to their value and their saturation, to create a sense of light play. And that is what I want to discuss today. I'll show you an earlier phase of this when I was blocking in some of the major shapes. And here's the key. In the beginning, I made sure that most of the colors had a fairly dark value, number one, and that the saturation levels were either muted or chromatic, nothing that reached towards prismatic, you see. That was at the early stages. And I'll give you another example here in just a moment. Having done that, it's a matter of bringing up gradually, in terms of placement, if you will, or arranging or composing, bringing up the saturation level gradually, but also being aware of the relationships of a given color in its placement to other colors. And that is something we will also have to discuss. So for instance, this particular red happened much later as I brought it up, and you can see that juxtaposing that red next to its complement, green, really makes it come forward, but it also has a sense of light play. This band of color here really pops and comes forward. Well, why does that happen? Again, because of its relationship to the colors that are above it and below it, which are much more muted, much more chromatic, and they're darker in value. So this idea of experimenting with color relationships to bring out light is a fascinating journey, which I really highly recommend you consider. One of my favorite artists that I've been looking at a lot lately is Paul Klee, the Swiss artist. And there are some examples here that will show you of how he works with a similar matrix using geometry to really push and pull, as Hans Hofmann would say, light and space. So you're really doing two things. You're creating a sense of light play, and you're creating a sense of spatial play. In this piece by Paul Klee, notice how in the periphery, it's all dark chromatic grays, warm and cool. Then gradually, as he moves towards the center, he brings up the luminosity by virtue of first having the muted hues, and finally in the center of this piece are the prismatic hues, really coming forward, sense of luminosity. He does the same thing here. Keep in mind that what creates this sense of spatial play as well as light play is the juxtaposition of the hues, the values, and the saturations. In this piece by Toulouse-Lautrec, the woman with the orange hair, her orange hair is full of light, not only because of the tinting of it, but because that orange, the color, is set in the midst of all those dark hues, which are the gentlemen around her. And the turquoise color in the background set against the complement, which is orange, also creates a vibrance of light play and spatial play. Edward Hopper's Nighthawk scene is a fantastic realization of the same phenomena. Look at the back building, for instance, where the red light comes against that building in the background. That's all done with prismatic hues set against the more muted hues. He does the same thing here in this interior scene of a theater. The light coming through those red curtains on the right, that's not done by adding white. That's done with the juxtaposition of that intense red set against the darker hues, just as he does with the orange lights on the left half of the theater. And finally, with Catherine Kehoe's piece, we have a shirt apparently hanging in the window, but it's in a very darkened room. So once again, playing with those dark hues, those chromatic rays, and when she punches up that intense red, it feels as though the light is actually coming through that shirt. That is the power
of color and luminosity.
In order to best demonstrate to you this idea of, first of all, color relationships, but this idea of having spatial play and a sense of light play and how to achieve that with color, I've devised this small composition and I've arranged 9 squares and rectangles. It's important to understand that I made sure that each square or rectangle butts up against another square or rectangle. This is the easiest and best way to really talk about color relationships. So already, this is my sort of opening statement, if you will, to make a design or a composition. I've been careful to place warm and cool colors around so they interact nicely. Right now, as I say, these colors are playing nice. They're all playing nice together. No one color or shape is demanding my attention. Now, part of that is succeeded by virtue of the fact that I made a conscious effort to make sure that these colors share similar values, which is halftones to dark halftones. And I've also made an effort to make sure that they share similar saturation levels, either muted or chromatic grays. So right now, nothing's popping forward too much, and it's a nice backdrop for experimenting with adding other colors in this design that begin to have more of a spatial play, number one, and eventually a sense of light play in the simplest of terms. So what I've done is I've cut out a few more shapes and pre-designed them, and let's begin with this shape here in color. This color is obviously warm. It's a little bit lighter than the one existing right here. And if I place it here, you can see that it begins to advance a little bit. It's advancing partly because of its value, but also because of its saturation, and also it's a warm hue. Now, the relationship of it placed here is different than the relationship of it being placed here because of the neighboring colors. This blue is really making it pop a little bit more because it is an opposite in terms of where it sits on the color light spectrum. However, if I place it down here, it doesn't pop quite as much. It does next to this green. So that's the number one, where to decide how to arrange it. So for this moment, for our demo, I'm just going to leave it right there. You see. The next color I want to bring into play is this color here. It's sort of an ochreish color, leaning towards a little bit of a mustard yellow or green. And when I was playing around earlier, I found myself placing it right here. I rather liked how it sat at that place. Again, my interest is as I introduce new colors, I want the spatial play to come up gradually. I want a sense of relationships to be experimented with. So that color going there is very different than if it sits here. I did not like how it sort of had too much attention going on here because of these two colors, whereas here it seemed to work a little bit better. But once again, I'm bringing up both the value and I'm bringing up the saturation level on these. Now, if I want to get fairly bold, I can introduce this color, which is a prismatic red, you see. But where to place it and will it integrate? It might be too much. I have to decide. If I place it over here, for instance, it really kind of pops here a little bit too much. But what I found myself doing is bringing it over towards this warm color. And the relationship here is fascinating because it seems to really work well in here. And because of this darker green, it's advancing quite a bit. And I rather like it there for now. Now, I would not leave my design here because most of the attention is going right here. So I have to counter this, you see. This is the point I want to make. So maybe I want to bring a warm note somewhere other in here. And I came up with this note. Now, this is a cooler red. This is a warm red. This is a cooler red, and it's fairly prismatic. It's almost a straight alizarin crimson. And I experimented with it here, you see. But now all of a sudden, that's problematic because all the attention is moving over in this area here because of this setup. So what I ended up doing, everyone, is I brought it over here to counter this other red. So now the eye moves in this fashion. But more to our point, you can see that by adding colors that are becoming more saturated, more prismatic, more intense, a spatial play is happening, but also a sense of light play is happening. Here's another color that I brought into play, and that is this phthalo green. Again, very intense. So experimenting with where a color goes really matters. You can see it's a matter of experimenting to find out where one color may work in unison with others. So I ended up trying it here, for instance, and that had one great effect because of the way the eye comes over to this corner. That could work, you see. But just by scooting it up to here, that also changes things quite a bit. And now we have this sort of interest going on here, which I rather like. And even placing it here has a very different effect, you see. I'm not so keen with it here because I don't like the way it's sitting here. So my option would probably be either to have it here or to have it up in this area here, which I'm going to leave it for now. This experimentation, everybody, this playing around with where colors can go next to other colors and experimenting with their saturation as well as temperature level is endlessly fascinating. Finally, I brought in this color here, which is a rather intense bluish purple. And again, it's a matter of experimenting with where it might fit, either in this shape or a smaller shape, you see. And this makes such a difference where things go. Eventually, what I chose to do was place it next to its neighbor here because this chromatic gray is coming out of purple. So I thought that maybe here it could experiment and come into this area as well. Or maybe it doesn't work at all, and then I just say, no, that's just not going to work. I don't like the color, and so on, it goes out. So normally, as I create a piece, as I showed you in my earlier piece, I would decide where I want something, and then I would glue it down, and it would be there, and I would just start playing. Now, at times, I might negate something altogether, and so I might bring in something like this and just start adding and playing around, and that becomes a big part of this experimentation. It's fine for colors to overlap, and by developing lots of relationships, you see, you can really begin to play with color advancing, receding, regarding its light, value, and saturation. In closing, I wanted to return to this painting that I created recently. It's actually mixed media. There's a lot of things going on here. I'm using everything from acrylic to gouache to pencil to colored pencil. And it went through many, many iterations and many changes. This is part of what I want to communicate to you, that none of this comes immediately, quickly, or easily. It is a process after all. It is a journey after all. But when we're working with color in these kinds of ways, the act of discovery is absolutely fascinating. If you're willing to spend the time experimenting with what color does when it's juxtaposed to other colors, I think you'll find that this experiment, this way of seeing and working color is light and color is spatial play, can be immensely rewarding. So I invite you to give it a try, even in the simplest of terms, and see what happens. I think you'll be dazzled by the results. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time around.